When companies expand internationally, we often focus on the entrepreneurs and businesses making those decisions. But behind every growing economy are the systems that make expansion possible: infrastructure, capital investment, and the way cities evolve. My guest today is Jason de Sousa, founder of Ideia Partners, whose work focuses on infrastructure investment and urban development across Australia and Asia. Jason and I have known each other for a long time. Today we're stepping back from the typical founder story to talk about the systems that enable economies to grow. Jason, welcome to the podcast. So I think I will want to start just with a bit of that broader context. And of course, a lot of companies think about global expansion in terms of markets and customers, but you have spent a lot of your career working on the infrastructure that actually makes global growth possible. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Global growth sounds impressive.
So
like it.
If that's the case, why are infrastructure and connectivity so important for economic development?
So I think if we look in an Australian context, it's pretty interesting. So during the Howard era, there was a lot of focus on a belief that the infrastructure was sort of a state issue, and federal government wasn't really an investor or a supporter of infrastructure. And I think that has proven to not be correct. And so now you've found that overall there's a real understanding now that and I'll extend that a bit further, you had state governments that sort of said, well, we had a premier that once remarked that Sydney was full in 1996. And by not building infrastructure, thereby the city would no longer grow, and therefore there wouldn't be any need for additional investment in infrastructure or housing or that sort of thing. And that has proven not to be the case. And so what we now have realized is that cities that operate with strong connectivity from public transport, with strong connectivity in terms of freight, whether it's road freight or rail freight, in particular rail freight, which is, we can talk about, and strong connectivity of people are the ones that are economically successful. And you look at the large cities, that is very much the case. And I always remark on a experience I had a couple of years ago where the Tokyo municipal government, which is a very large municipal government, came to Sydney, and the comment the general manager made was, "We have completed Tokyo's infrastructure, and so now we are doing narrowcasting back and narrowcasting forward." And what he meant by that was a backcasting and narrowcasting. That's what he said, to understand what infrastructure we need to renew, not build, renew, to continue Tokyo's growth and productivity growth. Right. So that's a very long-winded way of saying planning and infrastructure preparation, infrastructure delivery is what allows a city to grow efficiently. And that efficiency is what prevents sort of price spikes that we're sort of seeing across different markets. So in our market now, what are we seeing? We're seeing price spikes on housing. We're seeing price spikes on infrastructure costs generally. Those are all capacity questions that have come into play.
So does that mean that if we got our housing right and we connected it with the right transport, we might potentially bring the cost of housing down?
I think that's right. I mean, I think if you look at Sydney's case, we went through a period of expansion into the green belt, right? So people migrating out into the suburbs like Kellyville at the beginning, of the 2000s was farmland. Now it's, housing as far as you can see, right? Connected by road until the creation of the Northwest Rail Link. The northwest of Sydney had no infrastructure. And the Northwest Rail Link at that time was assumed to be this expansion of the legacy double-deck rail network, which is quite slow. And instead, the city decided to invest in single-capacity automatic trains to the northwest that has really transformed the way the city has worked. And the expansion of that into the CBD has now connected suburbs that were never connected before. So now you can go from sort of Marrickville and these sorts of places, Sydenham, all the way out to the northwest through the Harbour Bridge like that. It has changed
hour or so.
Half an hour.
Yeah.
It's changed the way Sydney-siders think about public transport, which of course, I'm from Hong Kong. Coming from Asia, this is quite common. Like you don't need a car in Hong Kong. In fact, it's more expensive to own a car than anything else, in Hong Kong, because you can, catch high capacity rail anywhere you want. I think that's the answer to the question on the housing front. That's where we're going as a city now. So you're now seeing across all of those metro nodes, housing build up around it, right? So areas like the Hills, like, the recent West Metro that's coming up now, White Bay, the government just announced will be a new housing precinct, with a high capacity metro in the middle of it. That is the future for cities like that in Australia. And certainly we're seeing that in other countries as well. Asia's already there. I think some of the Western countries are now starting to follow that.
And you need that densification to pay for public transport, obviously. Do you think that more densification means that quality of life in cities goes down?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, it depends on what we as Australians feel is appropriate living. So if you asked me this in Hong Kong, all of us lived in apartments. It's
Yeah.
quite common. If you ask me this in Tokyo, I'd say, well, many people live in apartments in Tokyo and have a wonderful life doing so. Same in Singapore, not so here, right? In Sydney, we have a lot of beautiful single dwelling suburbs. People are used to the backyard cricket analogy. The quarter acre block was a Western dream of home ownership, not just in Australia, in the UK, in the United States. Is apartment living where we're going? Well, as our demography has changed, I think tastes for apartments have changed as well. And so I think we're seeing a lot more apartment dwelling now around nodes. A lot of younger people start in apartments and then might, have children and then move out into the suburbs later on. This is a sort of well-worn path. If you look back, I arrived in this country in 1997. Apartment dwelling wasn't really
A thing.
right? It started sort of in the early 2000s. Apartments started being built, and they didn't trade very well for a period of time. Now we're starting to see a lot more densification of apartments, higher apartment buildings, lots of luxury apartment buildings coming into play to support the downsizing community. So I think we are by necessity moving towards that, and we're also starting to see different types of ownership structures. So build to rent is not really a thing in Australia. Hasn't been. 10 years ago, it wasn't a thing in the UK. Now it has become a thing in the UK. It was always a thing in the US. It's certainly a thing in Japan. It's certainly a thing in France and parts of Europe. Not really a thing in Australia, becoming one now. So 5 years ago, we might have been at 100 build-to-rent units. We've probably got 2,500 in the pipeline now. I think that will increase. And what's interesting about that from a business point of view is that is an institutional grade asset. So up till now, residential housing in this country has largely been a mum and dad investor-based thing. And that's why we have this debate about capital gains tax and, negative gearing and all of that sort of thing. And quality of rental apartments has been dictated by whether the mum or dad wants to invest in the property or not, right? Hasn't been any sort of standard around that. It might have impacted the price, but maybe they don't want to do that. An institutional grade product changes that. And so I think we're moving, the whole market is starting to change the way things, and as we've grown in the last 20, 30 years with pension funds becoming more aggressive in terms of where they want to invest to get returns to pay for an aging population, the creation of these new asset classes has been fascinating. So we advise on a bunch of these sorts of things.
And you've worked on infrastructure and development projects across multiple countries. How on earth did you get drawn into that?
I've always been interested in big things. I mean, I grew up in a family that where my father was what he would self-describe, not a particularly good engineer, but a particularly good business person. And he built a business, in a construction business in Hong Kong, which is still going. And he sort of chairs at 84 years of age young. And it did infrastructure. It built, pits, and it built bridges, and, it worked on, at that time when I was growing up, the Hong Kong's Chek Lap Kok Airport was being built, which was one of the biggest infrastructure projects of all time. It's a beautiful airport. And our company was there, and I would spend summers there, working in container offices, which our company was doing. I would chase invoices. I would, half of which I was speaking to people who were sometimes fathers of my friends, chasing invoices. It was a strange time.
That must have been awkward.
It was, when you're young, you don't really realize the nuances in some of these things, right? So I'm like, oh, hello, Mr. Smith, I'd just like that, check for whatever it is. And they were very understanding because they knew it was a summer job, and they would yell at my father later about the actual realities of things. So that really got me really interested in this sort of thing. I didn't follow the engineering path of my father. I followed more a sort of finance and development path. And so that's the side of projects I play on. I tend to work on bringing things together, right? And in infrastructure and in real estate and in real assets generally, the pathway to success on any deal is bringing different components together. So whether it be capital, whether it be development expertise, whether it be site acquisition, whether it be community and stakeholder approval for something which is becoming more and more important. And I've always enjoyed that I guess, agglomeration role. And so in my career, whatever it might have been, whether it might have been in government or in the private sector, that's really been my focus, is that sort of bringing things together and making something happen. The downside of that is once you make something happen and it goes into delivery, the guys that build the stuff and manage it afterwards get all the glory.
All the credit.
They're the ones cutting the ribbons, and we're long gone by
You're
that
standing
point.
in the back there somewhere.
Like, oh, yeah, I remember this deal. It was 5 years ago.
So, I mean, when you look at global business today and thinking about cities, what role do cities play in shaping economic opportunity for business owners?
For business owners.
Yeah, I mean, how does
Yeah,
how does the city play into that overall environment of, creating an opportunity for a business to grow and then go elsewhere? How does it work?
It's a great question, because I think cities are the agglomeration example of economic productivity, economic development. And so if you look at every country, we always talk about a global city, right? And so I use the analogy of our Melburnian friends because we're sitting in Sydney. They always talk about Sydney. We'll compare ourselves to Sydney. We're doing this in Melbourne, you're doing this in Sydney. And I keep saying to them, guys, I don't know why you're obsessed by this, because when we're in Sydney, we talk about Tokyo and we talk about New York and we talk about London and we talk about Dubai. Like, we're talking about financial centers that we're competing against. And I use that as an example of saying, well, that's the benefit of a city. The city is where the largest agglomeration effects for economic productivity happen. It's where the global talent comes to do things. And that talent comes together to create new things.
So is it about creating an environment that is somewhere that's exciting and inspirational and fun 100%. To be and easy to live in, and that draws the people, and then from the interaction of those people, you get the great business ideas and the innovation, and on it goes?
And so if you look at Silicon Valley, that is the argument behind Silicon Valley is, why did they go there? Well, there was land available there. They all decided to coalesce there, and they built basically these businesses that now have agglomeration effects that keep innovating, that keep growing and keep growing. And many places have tried to replicate Silicon Valley, but they don't have the density of the talent that wants to live there. Everyone wants to live in Silicon Valley. They don't want to go and live in another country's attempt at Silicon Valley.
So, controversial question, who's doing the best at this in Australia at the moment? If you had to pick a city that's creating that environment, is anybody winning, or?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is Sydney is the global city for Australia, right? Every city plays a role, right? So, Perth is our resources centre. You go to Perth now, it's gleaming, right?
Yeah.
It's gleaming. The resources companies are doing very well. Every city plays a role, right? And Sydney is our global financial centre. So for the sort of capital element of this, capital comes here. And most of my clients, they will come here and they'll say, I want to invest in these sectors, I want to invest in these areas, and I want to start in Sydney and Melbourne because they're the safest places to invest. The ones with the biggest population, they're the ones with the biggest sort of diversity of capital investment opportunities, the ones with the biggest companies, the ones with the biggest headquarters. That's what drives sort of economic growth generally. Look at our city here. It runs, is it 7 or 8% of GSP?
Is it as much as that?
It's pretty high. And there might be GSP, but it's pretty high.
And I mean, you won't hear it on the show, but the building we're recording in today has got a lot of construction going on. I guess that's all part of it, right? The city is growing.
It is.
Buildings are getting built or
this
remodeled.
Is a fascinating building, right? So this is 60 Margaret Street. This was purchased by a group of Japanese investors all involved in the rail industry.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Coordinated by that. And why did they buy into this asset? Because they find Australia a very safe place to invest. We act for a few Japanese clients. Japanese clients tend to invest all over the world because they've got so much invested in Japan that they need to expand overseas to
put
capture
money
more
elsewhere.
returns.
Yeah.
Right? And so they've saturated the Japanese market in a sense with their own capital, so they've got to find other stuff. And they are trying to use their expertise in overstation rail-related projects to, export that to the world. So 60 Margaret Street was an interesting deal because it's right over Wynyard Station, right? And they've all come together to sort of work on this project. So it's a fascinating building in that sense.
This episode is brought to you by OFX. One of the things we see all the time with companies expanding internationally is that the strategy might be sound, the market choice might be right, but the financial plumbing is just not keeping up. Managing global finances can quickly turn into juggling currencies, unpredictable cash flow, and far too much admin. OFX helps take that friction out. They're trusted by more than 37,000 businesses worldwide, and they make it easier to pay international suppliers and teams in local currencies, while saving on FX fees and simplifying the admin through one platform. If your business is operating across borders, OFX gives you clearer visibility and more control over your cash flow. You can find out more at ofx.com, and we'll put a link in the description. I wanted to ask you also about public-private partnerships, because this is a space you know a lot about. These infrastructure projects usually require government and private investors to work together, because that's what a PPP is. What have you learned about making those partnerships work in practice? Like, what does it take?
It's a great question, Sin, because it takes a lot of understanding on the government side to be a good counterparty, so the private sector can also be a good counterparty to government. And I think PPPs are very attractive for a couple of reasons, right? Complicated projects get wrapped in a structure. The private sector says, I'm willing to take on the risk of delivering this project, whatever it might be, and you pay me rent for it for a period of time, and then the asset comes back at the end and you can rebid it. The history of PPPs is interesting. The social infrastructure projects, the convention centres, which I was part of, under a new government, very successful. Hospitals generally, some not so, but some pure hospitals where you're just building a building and renting it to the government, quite successful. Transport projects, some difficult ones. So we had a light rail here in Sydney. It is a PPP. It struggled because the private sector bid a certain price and then claimed that price wasn't sufficient, and then basically argued that it should be compensated more. So in that sense, the transport PPP didn't quite work the way it was meant to. Having said that, the asset delivered is fantastic, and people love light rail in Sydney now, right?
Yeah.
So it's where I'm trying to get to on that is, for projects to work, they need to have very strong counterparties on both sides that have deep understanding of infrastructure projects. And for a period of time in New South Wales, that was absolutely the case. We had very, very high quality level of civil service who was able to deal with the private sector on the other side. That's not the case in all states. It's not the case in all countries. And getting people into that kind of role in government is difficult, which is why they continually appoint advisors, to be fair, like us, who help with this process.
Have you ever been in one of these deals, these complex deals, where a project nearly fell apart?
Absolutely.
Can you say more without getting us all into a lot of trouble?
Oh, that's true. Look, I think there have been several cases where projects have got into trouble and you've had to unwind them. Reliance Rail is a good example. That was a PPP to deliver rail rolling stock. It was struck at a period of time when debt was pretty cheap and insurance was run by, there was sort of a reinsurance scheme. The market changed completely, and the deal had to be reorganized.
This was back in 2011 or 12, right?
Long time ago.
I have a vague recollection of this.
And the thing I love about that story is the IM for that deal had the word complex in it, like 150 times or something. Don't quote me on the number. If anyone finds a document and reads it. But my point in raising it is, you shouldn't have a document that says the word complex 150 times, because if it's too complex, that means it's probably problematic.
It's probably going to go wrong.
I always say to our clients, too clever by half is not clever at all, right? You actually just want to focus on the fundamentals of a deal.
Yeah.
And that's what gets you to a successful place. And if both parties understand exactly where they're going and what the trajectory is and what the upside is and what the downside risks are and how they're managed, you will have a successful deal.
I want to zoom out a bit now, because I want to talk to you about the geopolitical context. We are, we're recording
nothing going
this.
On in geopolitics.
Nothing. We're recording in March 2026, okay? I think it would be fair to say that it's a time of considerable geopolitical uncertainty. I mean, things are changing evolving on a daily basis. I open the news every day and I'm like, wow, what happened today? How do geopolitical shocks affect infrastructure investment and economic development? I mean, we've got short-term supply chain shocks, but on a longer-term basis, how do you see what's happening at the moment? For example, strikes on Iran, or it's now the war in Iran, kind of contagion spreading across the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz closing. What's going to be the knock-on effect for infrastructure and economic development over the medium term or the longer term?
I think the shock, the Iran economic shock, let's call it that, is a continuation of where we've been going for a while, which is COVID, which is a thing that happened that nobody wants to remember, and I understand why, actually taught us a bunch of home truths. That the 1980s just-in-time supply chain, which we all learned about at school, and this is the way we're going to operate from now on. And in this car manufacturer, this thing arrives 5 minutes before it's meant to be bolted onto the vehicle. That doesn't work anymore. And all of a sudden, things that we took for granted are all of a sudden not accessible. So during COVID, there was this thing called AdBlue. You ever heard of AdBlue?
Yeah, that rings a bell.
What is it, right? It's an additive in diesel. It's an additive in diesel that was put in because we had emission standards that we wanted to meet. So because we had these emission standards, they produced trucks that rely on this AdBlue stuff. Do we make any AdBlue? No. We had to ask a company in Australia to start producing it because we imported it from China. COVID stopped it. So that's just one example. Australia during COVID found that it doesn't produce any ball bearings. Don't produce any ball bearings. Ball bearings are in everything. Right? Yeah. And so now we're talking about oil and we've got, 20 days supply or whatever it is.
Not the 90 we're supposed to have.
Not the 90 we're meant to have. And this is an issue we've been talking about for years. We had 6 or 7 refiners. We've only got 2. Both of them are about to be subsidized to stay open and stay open till 28 or something, right? So what happens after that? We don't harvest any of our own oil at the moment because apparently it's a lower grade oil. So we're importing oil. All of these questions are now going to be asked around, well, what does this mean for our own sustenance as a country? Say the word company too much. What does that mean? And what do we actually need to do to be sustainable as a country? And that means investing in our own supply chain base.
Do you see a resurgence of manufacturing?
I think that's difficult. I do see, and I've been saying this on our show for a while, is that I do see the friends and family package with nation states coming more into it. So the Quad is a good example of that. India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. India brings a workforce. Australia brings capital and intellectual property. The United States is the United States, and Japan brings, technology, intellectual property as well, right? You add that together and, the United States, I suppose, brings a security blanket as well, right? All of a sudden, you can see why what was a foreign minister's dialogue has now become a leader's dialogue and is working on economics, right, and economic issues. Similarly with AUKUS, AUKUS is primarily a defense relationship between Australia, the United States, and the UK that is allegedly only about submarines, but it isn't, because Pillar 2 of AUKUS is about technology.
Everything else.
And it's about technology sharing. Yeah. And we've got 3,000 people coming to Australia to work on this, and there'll be a whole industrial base that's built around that. So I think you're starting to see these groupings come together from an Australian context that are being repeated by other countries. So, you find, India in its own region starting to build relationships with countries around it, trying to contain its Pakistani problem, as from their perspective is a problem. You see China doing, it's thinking about what its regional development model is post Belt and Road, which has not quite worked the way it wanted. And they've tried to create their own security apparatus and all this sort of stuff. So I think the Iran conflict is creating a continuation of problems that I think we've been seeing before. That's leading to this, instead of what we used to call a just-in-case supply chain, it's just because we need it supply chain.
Yeah.
I think that's the new kind of way we're looking at
and
it.
if we have to change how we think about supply chains, we've seen that the just-in-time model is too fragile to withstand what's happening in the world today. Does that, or should that change how countries and cities think about infrastructure and connectivity?
Well, I think so. I mean, I look at somebody was remarking yesterday on the news, and I don't remember who it was, that, it's great that if you can get in your Tesla and drive to the shops to get your groceries, except there won't be any groceries there. I'm like, okay. So I do think it will change the way we think about infrastructure, about supply chains, and it will get us to value things differently. So I feel, for example, we don't value our agriculture sector enough, right? Like, agriculture is one of our great exports from this country. We produce excellent quality meat. We do excellent quality wine. We do excellent quality everything, right? Food, wheat, you name it. We don't really respect that as a primary resource, yet it's becoming more and more essential.
Yeah, and we export 60% of it, right?
We export 60% of it. Same for our mining resources. It's going to be controversial to say that, coal is a valuable resource, or, iron ore certainly is. Copper is becoming an increasingly valuable resource. We export a lot of that. Uranium is becoming a valuable resource. These are things for us that as a country will sustain us, where other countries that don't have resources like this are starting to suffer because they don't have a security blanket of something that is valuable to somebody else.
And so, on that note, in times of political instability or geopolitical instability of the kind we're seeing at the moment, do you think some cities become more attractive for investment and others lose ground? I mean, there are the obvious example, probably nobody's rushing to invest in Tehran this month.
That's right.
But,
might be good value buying in Tehran right now.
Down on the prices. But, do you think more broadly that, leaving aside the immediate conflict scenario, do you think some cities lose ground and others gain it?
Absolutely.
And why?
It goes back to your earlier question, where do people want to live? Like, why is Dubai at the moment a place where lots of people from Britain are choosing to relocate to?
I thought it was weather.
Well, weather could be one, it's boiling in Dubai. But the other reason is the sort of punitive tax regime that's being applied to sort of people who are wealthy in the UK.
Yeah.
And the United Kingdom government is raising taxes because it's got a ballooning welfare bill that it can't afford. And it's choosing to meet that by raising taxes, particularly on non-doms. These are the people who have capital, often are running companies or own companies, and they're leaving the country to move to Dubai, where there's no capital gains tax and, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no income tax.
Now, they're choosing to leave the UK to live in Dubai because that is a better scenario for them financially, and probably, standard of living would probably be better for them.
Yeah, well, you cannot, everybody has help in Dubai. Nobody has help in the
Dubai,
UK.
Right? I mean, my own hometown, Hong Kong, when the Chinese national security law was applied, it was a media sensation, right? Because of the umbrella movement and all this sort of thing that led to this law being put into place. It scared a lot of people, and a lot of expatriates left Hong Kong because of it, because they were worried that they would be captured by this law, which I would say, not to defend this law, which I don't particularly like, but it isn't dissimilar to other countries that have similar laws, right? Around criticism of national security. I'm not defending it, but so many people moved to Singapore or other places like that, and they found that, well, actually, the job market isn't as strong as they'd hoped, that things are very expensive, it's not great for them. Some moved to the UK and found that, things aren't great in the UK right now, or Europe. And so a lot of people are now starting to go back to Hong Kong to work in Hong Kong businesses that are exposed to the Chinese economy that will bounce back. It will come back, the Chinese economy, is no doubt. Why? Because it's a 60% tax regime. There's help there. There's all that sort of thing. People agglomerate in Singapore and Hong Kong, places like that. People should agglomerate in Sydney. The standard of living here is wonderful. That's why we all live here, right? We love it, right? I mean, I married an Australian, which is why I ended up living here permanently. Had I not married an Australian, who knows? But,
maybe Melbourne.
Maybe Melbourne. That's right.
So
I love Melbourne, by the way. I don't want to attack Melbourne. Melbourne's a great
you have
city.
to put a Melbourne joke in there. It would be rude not to, right?
Well, Melbournians probably joke about Tasmania. I don't know. Like,
and maybe Sydney. And,
we haven't brought up Queensland yet.
No. Yeah. Well, we could go there in another episode. Our producer is from Queensland too, so we kind of know him.
Queensland's a great place. I love it. Yeah.
So for founders and companies expanding internationally, what signals should they watch in the geopolitical environment where they're thinking about where to invest or where to expand to?
I take a more sort of nuts and bolts approach to this, right? So obviously geopolitics has a play and it creates uncertainty. So your immediate focus is flight to locations that have regulatory certainty, strong government, democratic government that, exudes stability regardless of the political noise around it, that doesn't change taxes every 15 seconds, that sort of thing. And that's why Australia has always been attractive, because we have a very stable government here, very stable economy. It has good growth trajectory, strong population growth. All of these sort of fundamentals are there. I would say then once you address those bigger questions, where is it stable for me to invest if we group it under that? It then comes down to, can I make money there?
Yeah.
Is the tax regime acceptable for foreign capital? Right? We have a constant debate here about withholding tax. It's horrible. It's not conducive. Is there an impact upon a government choosing to increase taxes? So when the Queensland government increased coal royalties by 40% without any negotiation, any sign that they were going to do that, not great for foreign capital who's invested in our resources sector. That they may not leave the assets they're in now, but it's changed the return profile that they had booked when they invested. That's not going to allow them to do more things. If we increase regulation constantly to the point where it's impossible to do things, that's not conducive to an investment. So when our clients come here, they look at those sorts of things, right? We're an Australian-focused firm. They say, what is the risk? And there have been cases where it has gone horribly wrong. I worked on a deal in a state, which I won't mention, where the officials from this state came and, isn't it wonderful, investor, great to have you here. It's wonderful. Thank you for your first investment in my state. And the next day they increased taxes.
Oh, no.
The very next day. And the investor was like, well, hang on, you told me that this was stable and, regulation and government was stable, and they just increased taxes the next day. The guy shook my hand. All right. So we can't have that sort of thing in Australia, right? And I think to answer your question, for a small business expanding, you've got to watch those things. Is the government stable? And I find, some of the Japanese clients we work with, they'll often say, oh yeah, we were asked to invest in Myanmar. The return profile was, well over 25%.
And you're like, there's a reason for that.
I said, did you earn the money? Oh, no, we didn't earn the money. I said, well, there you go.
Yeah. And so if you had to give one piece of advice, say, for example, to one of your Japanese clients thinking about global expansion today, what would you tell them to understand about the cities that they're entering? What's the most important thing that they need to consider about the cities they're going into?
It's what is the baseline opportunity you're actually investing in? And what is the value proposition you bring to it? And so sometimes money isn't enough, right? So I find with some clients, they'll come here and they'll have a check for a certain amount of money. And they'll say, I've got this money and I'd like to invest it. And it might be $20 or $30 million. And you might go, okay, that's great. It's great that you've got $20 or $30 million. But for the counterparty, why is that money valuable to them? Right. So for the counterparty, it's like, well, I'm inviting you into my project. I want $500 million. I want one party that I can deal with for $500 million.
Not
as
10 parties for 20.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And so for a lot of Japanese companies and Asian companies generally, they want a toehold. They want to test the water, understandably. So you then have to say, well, if your check is only $30 million, what else are you bringing? Is it IP? Is it technology? Is it, is it people? Is it how do you sweeten the deal? And so for a lot of our clients, that's what we advise them to do, which is, okay, your board has approved this strategy. They want you to invest in these sectors. You know, we might help guide their strategy. You should invest in these sectors. These are the potential deals you could work on. Here's the sort of return profile you're going in. How much do you have available in your budget? And they'll say it's X. Okay, good. Well, how do we sweeten this deal for the counterparty overseas? And remember, the overseas party often doesn't have the same cultural understanding of you as an investor in their country than you might have of them. So as a Western country, people understand us a lot better than we understand them, right? Foreign capital often speaks English. We don't speak their language, right? And yet we go there and we expect them to speak English.
Yeah.
Right? Why? Why is that the case, right? We expect them to adhere to sort of Western norms as opposed to their own norms. Like, I'm from Asia. I can see the difference. Why? Right? And I'll give you a case in point, right? So we had a situation where investor was buying an asset, and they said, we would like a report to be produced for us I'm going to make this up, the second Tuesday of every month. And the counterparty said, we can't do that. Now, we only produce reports on the fourth Tuesday of every month. I said, but we need the report on the second Tuesday of every month. Well, I'm sorry, our accounts department doesn't do that. You know, like Debbie in accounts will be furious if I ask them to give them that workload. And I sort of said to them, guys, they're buying this asset from you. You want them to buy this asset for you. Have you asked yourself why they need the report on the second Tuesday of every month? Because their board meeting is the third week of every month, and they need to give this to this person so they can give it to that person to tell them that their investment is fantastic. So by you not giving them that report, you're making them look bad, and they're the ones who've told their headquarters and wherever it is that this is a fantastic deal. I think Debbie might want to do a bit of extra work. Oh, well, why didn't they just say so, right? Yeah.
I love it.
So that cultural understanding piece, I think, comes into it.
And look, that is a great note to wind up on. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been so much fun chatting to you. Yeah. And I look forward to seeing, where you take Idea Partners and the world of infrastructure investment next.
Always fun. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure.